Shalom, welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Chabadis of Delmar, together with my co-host Mark Ronich of Statewide News Service and JBizTechValley.com.
Rabbi, if you remember, we recently had Stephen Burke on the program. He's a Union College history professor, and he always said, "I'm a historian, not a prophet."
Right.
And now we're moving up a little north to Saratoga, and our guest today is a historian from about the Saratoga Jewish community from way back, and it's Amy Godine, and I hope I pronounced that right.
You did, you got it right.
Welcome to the Jewish View. I'm glad that you're on the program.
Pleasure to be here.
I've been doing a lot of research about Saratoga's Jewish community, and I'd like for you to fill in some of the tell us some of the stories.
I'd love
Because,
to.
when you think of Saratoga, what comes to mind? Horses.
That's right.
Saratoga horses, you don't think of, like the Catskills, where you think Borscht Belt, Jewish. But Saratoga and Jewish don't really come to someone's mind, but that's really not so true. So you
Not
fill
so
us
true
in.
at all. It was, it's been a strong draw for Jews in this country since the late 1800s. And there was a strong disincentive to come after Jews were rejected from the Grand Union Hotel, after Seligman's party was expelled very publicly and famously in 1877. And that put Saratoga on the map.
Right, it was the
as
first
an anti-Semitic town.
Yeah, the New York
unfortunately.
Times article did a number on this, and he was a banker from New York City. He would come up to Saratoga every year.
He'd stay
with
there
his
before with his retinue, his family.
right,
And the
and his maids and butlers and everyone, entourage would
very
come
wealthy
up.
man, very well regarded man, an advisor to Ulysses Grant. He helped to refinance the debt and put us in the clear after the Civil War. And this was an event that made headlines in London,
Because
in San Francisco.
The hotel was sold during the year before he came up when this incident happened, and the guy who bought it was an elected official in the city of Saratoga.
That I don't know about.
And
I
he
know
said-
Henry Hilton, is that who you're thinking of? He was the one who
He
laid
says,
down the law.
What I saw from the Philadelphia Jewish Museum when they have this whole exhibit is that he said, your type of Jew is not welcome here. It makes our other people in the hotel, uncomfortable.
So, even though he was wealthy?
You're right.
Very
So we would
wealthy.
prefer that you don't stay here. I own it now, and we'd like for you to go back to New York City. And he went out back on the train and went down, but he kept suing the hotel. And these lawsuits really drained him to some extent emotionally. And he, passed at an earlier age. People feel that he passed at an earlier age than he had otherwise.
Well, you know more about his biography than I do,
Well-
for sure. I do know that my interest in it was what was its impact on Saratoga history.
Sure.
Which turns out to be a little different than its impact on national history. It kind of legitimized public organizational anti-Semitism. It was not the first time this had happened, but it was the first time it was this public and this bold-faced and this splashed all over the headlines. And it sort of permitted other hotels to publicly do the same thing and have policies that were exclusionary.
Well, it seems
and
the
openly
opposite. Once
so.
you get a headline, people back off, like, oh, this
Didn't
is
work
ridiculous.
out that way. There was plenty of resistance to it. There were people who spoke out against it, and some of them quite prominent. But it seems that it didn't have a great impact, that it kind of opened up.
Well, if they're doing it, everybody else could do it.
Exactly.
And then it's not
if they're
news.
getting away from it and they aren't going to be sued, then it isn't news anymore.
Right.
And it was another 11 years or so before Jews were permitted to stay at the
And
Grand
then,
Union.
and now you created, you with another person who we were talking about that we both know, Marie Morrison, created this area of downtown Saratoga Springs called The Gut. And what is in The Gut? What is that all about?
Well, let me backtrack one step.
Okay.
When he said, don't come to this hotel, it didn't mean Jewish Americans were going to stop coming to Saratoga.
When
When the Grand Union management
Right.
said, "You're not welcome here," to
Right.
Seligman and other Jews. Jewish immigrants weren't interested in the Grand Union anyway, and they liked the springs. They wanted to come and take the waters and drink the water and soak in the baths, and they were going to find a way to do it. So other hotels emerged to meet the need. And just because the grand hotels on Broadway were maybe saying no didn't mean that a whole other generation of hotels didn't rise up. Some of them were in the neighborhood of the Gut. More in that neighborhood, boarding houses and rooming houses than proper hotels as a rule. It was a low-income,
But this
poor
is
neighborhood.
what's the same timeline as the Catskills? I mean, the Catskills are building up also around the 1880s, you're
The
saying?
1920s, I think, the Catskills.
So this
It
was
starts in the
really even
1880s
before,
and
yeah.
it builds and builds until the 1840s, 50s. In Saratoga,
1940s and 50s.
that's what I meant
Yeah.
to say, thank you.
Yeah.
It really lasts until 1960, and then
Mhm.
there's a nosedive, and these places start to close all over the place.
So really, it was even before it preceded the Catskills, Saratoga.
I
people
think it
coming there.
did. Some scholars have argued that Sharon Springs benefited
Mm-hmm.
from what happened at the Grand Union, because people who would have gone to the Grand Union said, well, to heck with that. I'm going to Sharon Springs, or I'm going to buy my own great camp in the Adirondacks and make that my retreat, or I'll find other places in the White Mountains or in the Berkshires or wherever.
And that's how Sharon Springs has one final synagogue that is teetering,
Yes.
and they only open for a few weeks in the summer now. It's the Satmars that run it.
Yeah.
And then certainly Tannersville and Hunter are booming in the summertime. And Hunter is a year-round synagogue.
Right.
But, you know, in the summer it's Orthodox, the rest of the year it's conservative.
Right.
Well, why is
Yeah.
that? Since, things are booming in certain areas, Saratoga, is booming obviously with the horses and the SPAC. In other areas, it surely is a booming town, but in Jewishy, it really isn't the place to be.
don't
Or
know.
Sharon Springs also, for
Well,
that part.
I think
just-
it's doing okay in that department. There's the new Hasidic boys' school near the
The
arterial,
yeshiva.
right,
Yeshiva,
just on the
yeah.
edge of town.
Which is a Bell's, right? It's Bell's Yeshiva,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, and they've been coming for a long time. The Belzer Hasids, and also the Chabad is
Yeah, very
active,
good.
is it not, in
Yes, very much
Saratoga?
so.
In a beautiful old building right in the
Yeah.
heart of town.
On Circular Street.
Right.
And they sort of combined and took over where Base Masha left
That's
off.
right, yeah.
So was the transition.
But I'm just saying,
Yeah.
you don't have the wave of New Yorkers coming in for the summer.
No.
I guess the Catskills also, there's no good kosher hotels in the Catskills also. So why people have run away? I guess it's a general question from upstate New York.
Oh, I
See,
think it's
Sharon
happening
Springs
all
is down.
over. I think vacation patterns among Jews started to change in the 60s and 70s. And
With airlines.
exactly,
yes.
with the wide-body jet and reduced fares in airlines and
And
the rise of a second home economy
Right.
and more options for vacation going and resorts. It changed the whole pattern of what increasingly assimilated Jews wanted to do with their spare time and
Exactly.
weeks. So I don't think Saratoga really stood out. I think it actually kind of held its
Indicative,
own. Yeah, against that tide.
So again, now
To the
moving
Gut.
to the Gut, yeah.
Yeah. The Gut is one of several neighborhoods in Saratoga Springs that had a kind of Jewish flavor. A bigger neighborhood, I think, was probably South Broadway, from what is today's Art Center on Spring and Broadway, moving down toward the Washington Inn. There were dozens of Jewish hotels, almost all of them gone now. There's one hotel left, the Inn at Saratoga.
Yes.
that has-
Liz Israel, the
That's
Israel
right,
family owns it.
that
yes.
has a connection to a Jewish legacy.
Yes.
But that, I think, is the only one
Yes,
left.
it is.
And almost all of the buildings left, the physical structures where you might put a plaque,
Right.
are gone. So Marie and I felt the Gut was the appropriate place to put a sign because there's the greatest concentration of buildings that still referred back to the heyday of that ethnic
So it's
neighborhood.
not
So
really
it
this-
runs from
Yeah.
Spring Street near Congress Park
Right.
to Broadway, Circular Street, and Lake Avenue? Is this the quadrant?
Yeah.
People can see it, maybe hold it up for people.
Do you think they can see
I
it?
don't think they.
I don't think you can
No,
see
you can't
this.
see
So
it.
they're zooming it up. No, try it.
No, they can't zoom in.
Look. Can you zoom it up over here?
I think
I
that's
gotta
a
walk.
tough
I gotta
one.
get up and walk to the oh.
This is from
Can
the
you?
brochure that
Don't put it back. All right.
it's hard to see.
It's hard to
Yeah.
see, but
This
all
is
right, I'm
a
sorry.
mock-up of the brochure
many
that
people-
Marie and I developed for a
Right.
walking tour that
Yes.
takes you past what few monuments are
Jewish
still
markers
there.
are there.
Yeah, there are
so what are
no.
there,
There's only
15?
one marker. There are 15 locations, and on some of them you have to rely entirely on your imagination. Where a sort of novelty act, strongman act called the Mighty Atom used to come with his truck and flog his
A
hair
Jewish
tonic.
guy? A Jewish guy?
Yeah,
Really?
with hair down his back that he would wrap into a coil and pull a truck with to prove how great his hair tonic was. He came up from Brooklyn every summer for a few weeks. He camped out there at Phila and Putnam, or that's where he did his act. There's nothing there to tell you he was there now.
Except maybe an informational plaque.
There's a Ben and Jerry's stand
Yeah,
and the
right.
plaque that says the gut, but without this, you'd never know he was there. You wouldn't be able to tell looking at the buildings that are still there where these hotels and some fine, not so fine, and rooming houses were, that was their history. There's nothing architecturally distinctive about the neighborhood that says, I was Jewish.
Well, the state
that's
education
there.
department puts these historic plaques
Right.
on places that say, you know, this was the first schoolhouse. And
That's how you learn.
And they have, and there's nothing but a regular home there, but they say, this is where the first schoolhouse stood.
Yeah.
Or across from the Capitol, it says, this is where George Washington traveled from Albany to Schenectady. Or so-and-so started electricity. This is where electricity started.
So you have to use your imagination.
And then
with these
but they
places.
have
Yeah.
these special
Well,
plaques
it's
that
just
you can
markers, he's saying,
that you
to
can
maybe put up
apply
some more
to the
mark.
state education department to get a plaque through on all of these marks, so people can then go around and see that there were the atom, and have that the language that you have in the brochure can be
Right.
put on a plaque that's there on the corner.
It's true. We could do that. In the meantime, we do have the brochure, which is
Right.
flying out of the visitors center.
It is.
So clearly, there's an interest in it.
It's flying so fast that I only could get a photocopy of
Oh,
it.
I'll send you a copy. You should have your own copy. A lot of this neighborhood fell to urban renewal,
Yes.
and there's a whole chunk of it that's missing. That was
They just
bulldozed.
knocked down.
Yeah,
downtown Albany was the same thing. That's where the big synagogue on the corner where there's a gas station now on South Pearl and Ferry Street is just an empty lot, but they called it urban renewal. And
Right.
It's now, it used to be a gas station, now it's just an empty lot.
This neighborhood saw some good development where
Yes.
things were knocked down. The beautiful new library of Saratoga is in the heart of what was the gut. That sort of anchors it. And several of the buildings around it, part of the old gut, are still there and still thriving as
Well,
small
maybe that's a
businesses.
project you and I could work on in terms of getting these plaques up around
It's
the
a
city.
thought, yeah.
And
yeah.
I'm sure the mayor, Yepsen, would be very happy to support it also.
Yeah, it would be fun.
They'll take Marie's place. Okay.
Marie was terrific. She
Yes.
was an old Irish Paul who loved ethnic and oral history.
And she worked, I knew her when she worked for Oliver Capel when he was an assemblyman.
Yeah,
She worked for him
that's right.
for a long time, chief of staff and just his right arm when he was in the Senate. And she moved with him to the Attorney General's office, I
Yeah,
believe.
she talked about him in
Yeah.
glowing terms.
Yes, yes.
And I resisted her like crazy when she called me up to get us going on this project
Wow.
because I had other fish in the fire, I had other work projects.
Well, I'm glad she
working
convinced
on.
you.
Yeah, me too. It was fabulous to get to know her, among other things.
So what else? There was a Sha'arei Tefillah was at 99 Circular Street.
Right, that was the first. It wasn't the first synagogue. There was another at Broadway and Van Dam, but that wasn't close enough to the Jewish population to really serve it. And I think they needed a bigger place by the time they moved into and then bought Sha'arei Tefillah.
So was it Orthodox then?
It was
This was
Orthodox.
This was 1926.
Yeah, and it was Orthodox,
Yeah.
right.
Well, that's all that they knew back
That's
in
all they knew from
1926,
at that
yeah.
point. That's
This was
right.
only really the summertime, putting in perspective, or there was like a year-round Jewish community?
Well, this
or
is the
just
beautiful thing about Saratoga. That's a great question. This was developed, organized to serve the year-round Jewish community. Who, the founders of this congregation, there were 25 people who signed on as the first directors. Most of them were peddlers. And this was a generation that came from Eastern Europe. The children of peddlers were the ones who founded this, and their parents. And then the summer people who came helped to support this and gave underwriting to it and came to services as well. And as that community developed and boomed with the rise of the Jewish hotel scene, which we can talk about, the concentration of summer guests moved from this area to South Broadway, more and more toward those hotels. And later on, I forget the date, I think it's in the 30s, some hotel men from that neighborhood said, we really need a place right here so people don't have to walk so far for services, so we're going to open up another synagogue or community center here.
Right, and what was that called?
That's the community center.
That's the community center.
And that had another name.
That
Can't
was
remember
Beis
it.
Masha.
It was the beginning of Beis
Beis
Masha.
yeah.
It was on Broadway.
On Broadway,
It
when
was
I
on
first
Broadway
came
in
in.
what was called the House of Panza. It was based on an old Pompeian mansion.
Then it became the YMCA, and now it's something totally
It was
else.
Paleo. No, it's not Paleo. It's another
Right.
corporate thing.
Now it's a corporate
Right now,
thing,
yeah.
But
Now,
what about
I remember 10 years ago that Lafayette Street had little congregations in the
Yes.
summertime, and
Yeah.
I davened there a couple of times.
That's
It was St.
right.
Kaddish.
Yeah, right.
That was
Representing different groups.
yes, and you had to know, like you had to have someone take you there,
Yeah.
because otherwise, you were welcome after the first or second time.
Right.
They had to get to warm up to you. But
The-
if you just walked in, it was like, okay, you can daven here, but we don't know you.
The
It was very strange. It
the
was,
Belzers were there
Uh-huh.
for a while, and now you say they have the bigger one.
The yeshiva.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So some of those buildings have been knocked down just in the last 2 years because they just got so run down.
Yeah, they were
and
run
they
down
had to be
9-10
taken
years
down.
ago. Yeah.
They've been run down a long time.
But
Yeah.
that.
But they
as-
kept it going.
And they did keep it going.
Yeah.
And then there's Joe's Bar and Grill. Was that
Right.
kosher?
Oh, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Two successive groceries, Levine's and Tannenbaum's,
Mm-hmm.
anchored the corner building on Phyla and Putnam. East on Phyla, Joe Kofkin's
Yes.
Grill met the popular demand of good delicatessen. Nate Goldsmith launched his luncheonette in 1938,
Not kosher.
non-kosher luncheonette.
Not kosher, yeah.
His bigger restaurant at 43 Phyla, Mother Goldsmith's,
Yes, he was Mother Goldsmith.
opened in 1945. Nate was Mother, nicknames like Boo Boo Coleman and Naya Greenberg
Yeah, yeah.
were a Saratoga tradition. Skidmore co-eds loved Nate's Sundays. Bookies appreciated his late hours.
Oh,
That's
Marie
funny.
and I had fun writing this. It was a challenge to get all this information into these tiny sound bites, as you can imagine. At its peak, Saratoga had as many as 75 Jewish hotels, rooming
Really?
houses,
That's
and
so
boarding
many,
houses.
wow.
Not different buildings necessarily. Some of these places represented the same building that would change ownership every year or two and change names with it for whatever
What
reasons.
year was it when you say the peak at 75? What
Oh,
year?
it's a 50-year span, and I put it from 1910 to 1960. And that's when I see it fading out and building up at the first end and fading out in the other. Really, it starts to,
The old European immigrant Jews just
Yeah.
started.
yeah.
So you should
Dying
do
off.
something to celebrate 100 years of Judaism in Saratoga.
It'd be fun to have another. We had in the beginning, when I curated an exhibit on the convergence of the summer Jewish community and the year-round Jews some years ago at the History Museum called We Were All Like a Family. And we had a lot of lectures and roundtables and oral history events around that. many people from that first generation who could really speak with specificity
Right.
about the heyday of the gut are gone.
But
That's kind of sad.
But
yeah.
I would think that, with the Saratoga Cultural Festival that's in the summer, that Saratoga Jewish Cultural Festival
You're right.
that they have in the summer, it's 9 different events that they have. I would say that maybe one of those events could be celebrating 100 years of Jewish life
That's
and
a
culture.
great idea. That's a great
And then
idea.
you also Saratoga Racecourse.
Yeah.
I've had a little bone to pick with them this year, in that they had 5 weeks of on Wednesdays his Heritage Days, where they had African American, Asian, Latino, Irish, and Italian.
Yeah.
And I raised my hand at the
They
news
didn't have
conference and I
any-
said, "What about the Jews?"
That's strange because many Jews came up for the races.
You know.
Not primarily for the races, but enough did so that there's a changeover in the hotels from July to August when the Jews coming up for the cure and the baths and the water give way to the horse and gambling crowd. That's a different scene completely.
I
And
always
that
say,
starts in
it's
August.
interesting because my father, may rest in peace, he says, I hear about, when I'm from Chicago, hey, I heard about Saratoga mineral baths, let's go. I says, all right, you're going, I'm coming. So we went a few times and, I explained to people why we went, and because, people have arthritis, rheumatism.
Sure.
There's no cure now.
No.
But now, in the olden days, they were more realistic. You go to a mineral bath and it
Yeah.
would probably ease your muscles or whatever it does medically, but
Yep.
nowadays people are just so into, give me a pill, give me a remedy, and they just,
Yeah.
even the natural
I hope
things
there's
are
a
probably
revival
just
of
as good.
interest in the baths. I think that it's a natural, as you say, an organic, a local, a homeopathic remedy that people are starting to embrace again.
Now,
Not necessarily Jews, though. There are Koreans who are very interested in it. People from Asia are coming in greater numbers. It would be nice to see a full-bore revival.
So since we're talking about the baths, we had the Lincoln baths, we had the Roosevelt baths.
Right.
And what was there, a third? There
The
was
Washington baths.
the Washington baths.
3
Okay.
bathhouses,
I
yeah.
don't know, your
And-
presidents.
Right.
Yeah.
Where are we with the baths now? Because one of them was taken over as the dance museum, I
Right,
believe.
right.
One of them, the state parks took over, I
The
think.
Roosevelt is still going as a bathhouse.
That's the one, okay.
That's the only one that's still going as a bathhouse.
Okay. So, there could be some tie-in with that, I
Yeah.
mean, historically, and to talk about that and connecting with the Jewish. Not that
And-
Roosevelt was so good with the Jews, but I'm just, as a
No, but
president.
it's true. It's a great idea, and that was the high-end bathhouse.
Uh-huh.
They were tiered.
Yeah.
Different classes went to different ones. Some were more affordable than others.
Really? I didn't
Yeah,
know that.
yeah.
I just remember, and I've been around the Capital District now around 30 years, and I remember the old Hasidim, the old, Orthodox Jews, and they loved going there, and because they knew from Europe, they were from Hungary,
Sure.
and again, that would be, like you say, the natural remedy. Even though I almost laugh, well, there's even with all the modern medicine, there's no cure for all these things, arthritis and rheumatism.
Well, that becomes a selling point in the 30s with the rise of anti-Semitism and fascism in Europe. A selling point, a marketing point for the developer of the mud and sulfur baths.
Where was that, in Europe, you mean? I don't know.
No,
heard of
here.
it.
Here
Well,
in
in
I never
Saratoga.
even heard of it.
this is a man who moves to Saratoga to take the cure, falls in love, buys a hotel, and then buys a springs, and then discovers the mud baths there, or develops the mud soak, or whatever you call it. Jacob Weinbrot, I'm sorry, I may
That's
not be
okay.
remembering it right, but he writes in his PR, look, don't go to Europe for the baths anymore. You have a better deal here, and we're all American, and we allow everybody in, and nobody's excluded, and this is the American way. So it becomes a pitch, the fact that the American baths can upstage the European baths and beat them at their own game. And it's brilliant. I should say that I just finished a chapter on Jewish Saratoga for a new history of Saratoga Springs.
Wow.
And I'm hoping that will excite interest in this history as well.
So I'll put it on my website, jbiztechvalley.com.
Oh, I'll
if you
send you the
that.
info. Yeah, it's going
please.
to be a marvelous
And
book.
I have an article here from the Chronicles of Saratoga, December of 1965, and the headline is Uproar Against Anti-Semitism.
What was happening then? That's
It
before
says,
I moved here.
Over the Long Term is a book the story of 100 years of J&W Seligman and Company. Many references are made to Saratoga Springs and the coming out of the Seligmans here. So maybe that was what we were talking about earlier.
But why in 1965?
I don't know.
Yeah.
They talk about Seligman's friendship with General Grant,
Mm-hmm.
and of course General Grant had some anti-Semitism.
He did indeed. It's an interesting
Yeah.
acquaintance given his own track record, which
and that
isn't
was
so pretty.
an article I wrote about that's on my website.
Oh,
About
good.
Grant was an anti-Semite.
Yeah, I'll look for that.
He won on the Jewish vote.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Afterwards,
Jewish
he
vote.
said he's sorry, wasn't he? I don't
Well, he
know.
might be sorry. I mean, Ford was sorry too, but Jews don't buy Ford, so don't tell me you drive a Ford.
No, I don't.
Anyway, here we have an article about this guy Rudy Cohen, who was the last in the line of family bakers in 1977,
Mm-hmm.
and he was, it's a great article about how he baked challah and his tea biscuits, and back then it wasn't all processed; it was handmade. And,
Yeah, there was Max Felix Bakery as well,
Uh-huh.
who called himself the great-grandson of the inventor of the bagel. He's very proud of that. And
Uh-huh.
there were several kosher butchers in town, kosher fish seller, newsstands that sold Jewish newspapers
Wow.
and magazines. It
I just
had a
feel bad
stronger
because, like,
Yiddish
I know, like,
flavor.
maybe New York is revitalizing, like Brooklyn. I'm from Chicago, and all Jewish neighborhoods, I guess I'm 29 years old, but, going back, I mean, I say that to a lot of people that of course, the rabbi care about the religious needs and their commandments, but on the other hand, Jewish people, the older generation, live with the smells and the sounds of a Jewish neighborhood, and nowadays, a child raised up, you can teach them what you want, but there's something missing in those old Jewish neighborhoods,
No,
like you're saying.
that's gone. That's gone,
It's a
isn't
shame.
it?
I feel bad always, like the hotels, you're saying Saratoga, the Catskills, there is something missing with those,
Yeah.
everything is
What
nicely
was,
packaged.
what was the Greenfield Center House?
Oh, I don't know. You're onto something there.
It's an old dairy.
This must have been one of the several, it turns out, farmhouses outside of Saratoga that took in people looking for a
How did
real
people
cure.
get there in the 1920s? By car? There was trains?
Take a train and someone would send a carriage or
Or
a
sometimes
taxi.
horseback.
I think these folks came up on the train.
Okay.
But this is a new one. This is thrilling. I've been collecting these farms. I'm very interested in them
Well, there
because
you
Were
go.
Jewish farmers in the olden
yeah,
days?
yeah, and some of them were quite politically radical.
Yes.
Or left-wing radical?
Yeah, yeah. You're familiar
from
with
Russia?
the graphic artist Ben Catchor, who did the. Are we over time?
No, good.
yeah,
No,
go
we're
ahead.
good.
He did a
Finish your-
great comic book. He's done a lot of graphic comic books on New York City and about old neighborhoods.
Mm-hmm.
And his father ran a place, Catcher's Farm and Hotel,
Mm-hmm.
out on Old Gick Road outside of Saratoga, and he was
He was raised there?
far to the left. No, his son didn't know much about it. We met and talked about it, and I had more to tell him than he had to tell me.
Well, you mentioned Max Fallick earlier,
Yes.
and I just found his obituary. He was 94 when he died,
Yeah, he was a great
and he
guy,
died in 2004, at age
Yeah.
94. So,
and he was sharp as a tack.
and he had Fallick's Bakery on Congress Street
Mm-hmm.
for many
He
years.
lives in Saratoga?
He lived in Saratoga.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he grew up in Saratoga. He went to
Right.
Saratoga schools, I think, or
And here it says
that
that, he was affiliated with what is today the Jewish Community Center cemeteries where he was buried, and
Right.
the congregation Shari Tefillah was this congregation. So-
yes, yeah. The congregation the people we're talking about who lived in the
Yeah.
gut and who ran these hotels were affiliated with Shari Tefillah,
Mhm.
not with Temple Sinai. That's another newer population coming in.
Mhm.
And there's a little bit of crossover there
'Cause
in the
Temple-
early days, but that's
Temple
really a
Sinai
different
is
scene.
in the mid-1900s, right? Or they just
Oh, much later than that.
much later?
Temple Sinai, yeah, I'd say
80s? 1980s or earlier?
60s, 70s, I think.
60s, 70s,
Yeah.
okay. So,
I should have a hard fact with you on that one.
well,
but
there
I
you go.
don't.
Why,
Yeah,
you a
and I'm
member
a
of Temple
member.
Sinai?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed. I'm sorry, rabbis. I can't remember when the year of founding was, but
Okay.
that's a group that hives off from newcomers to town, people affiliated with Skidmore, people coming in who want a reform
yeah.
tradition in
Okay.
Saratoga. They're the ones who
Well,
start that.
this is, thank you so much
Oh,
for
sure, it's
coming in
fun.
and learning us something here.
Teaching us. All right, Amy, very good. We want to wish you the best and
Thank
finding
you.
out. History is important. Like I say, for Judaism, you have to be present and ongoing in future, but you have to know your past.
You do.
That's important for for anybody, but for Jewish life, you have to know where you're coming from in order to know where you're going. So you're doing a good service to the Jewish community,
Thanks.
Teaching about the Jewish history of
It's
Saratoga.
fun, yeah.
Maybe Mark and I will have to go to the Roosevelt Baths
No.
thing
Yeah.
over here. You get us interested in the beauty of Saratoga. And it
I'll
is
give you a little
beautiful-
walking tour. Come
Thank
on
you
up.
so
I'll
much.
walk
Thank
you
you,
around.
Ann.
And
Okay.
can I have a copy of this?
Yes, thank you
Yeah.
very much. I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Thank you.